So happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome to the Mo You Know Show. I am your host, Monique Wrigley, and today we're going to dive into a show that I've kind of coined Moments of Truth. And this show is an opportunity for my dynamic guests, our panelists, to share some of their perceptions on some very real topics that many people with the same views discuss privately and even openly in the public. And that happens usually with the same views. What we don't see a lot of is people with different views. We don't have that opportunity to unpack folks with different views in a public and or even private situation. So what we're doing is sitting down to the virtual table today, and we're going to discuss publicly some very real topics. And you're going to hear some varying opinions. And what I'm hoping that you will all get from this, just one moment, please, is some empathy, some understanding of individuals and others' thoughts. And with that, we're going to have a challenge at the end. And that challenge is for you all to walk away and have some of these same discussions privately and openly, and have some understanding, a better understanding of what some of the views are, and etc. So first, I'd like to allow my phenomenal guest to introduce themselves to you all. I'm going to start with Dr. Bryant, one of our panelists.
My name is Dr. Bryant. I am a professor at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, North Carolina. My research area is Big Derek just came in. Race, institutional inequity, and black and white body politics within the United States. Spent most of my life as a social activist, community organizer. I'm from Pinellas County, Largo, and specifically Florida. And that's really it. I mean, I think that's pretty much the gist right now.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with us this evening. Next, I'd like to move on to Mr. Larry. Larry, please give us a brief introduction of yourself.
How you doing, folks? My name's Larry Marville. I'm retired. I'm originally from Cape Cod, up in Massachusetts. I'm retired down to Florida for 4 years now. I do a little part-time work as a yacht captain. And I'm here today just to try and get a little more educated on what's going on in our country right now. That's about it for me.
Thank you so much, Larry. I appreciate that introduction. All right, moving right along. Love for you, Mr. Tom, to please give us an introduction of yourself and a little bit about why you're here today. Tom, we can't hear you. We lost your audio. No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm Tom Galbo. I'm an auctioneer in Pinellas County here in Palm Harbor. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, and I have background in law enforcement. I have a degree, a bachelor's degree in law enforcement, and I've been a firefighter. I worked in juvenile justice, and I'm kind of a community activist. I like helping people. And it doesn't matter who they are. I'm just out to help people. And that's what I'm hoping to get out of this, is that somebody may see my views and may agree with it and may make a change for somebody.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And last but definitely not least, we have Mr. Derek Redding. Derek, do you mind giving us an introduction of yourself? Derek?
I've had to move outside. I got on my cell phone if I can get a better signal, but I don't know if you guys can hear me or not. If you can, just give me a thumbs up. Let me know you can. I've had to move outside.
Oh, you just went out a little bit.
Originally from Largo. There.
Come back in a little bit. Yeah, you went out. We couldn't hear you for a second. Derek, are you there? Come back in. Yeah, you went out. We couldn't hear you for a second. All right. Derek, are you there? Come back in. Yeah, you went out. We couldn't hear you for a second. All right. Derek, are you there? Come back in. Yeah, you went out. We couldn't hear you for a second. All right, guys. I'm not sure what's happening there with Derek's phone. Can you guys hear me?
I can.
All right. All right, I had to remove him. All right. So what we're going to have to do.
I can still hear you.
Okay, great. So when Derek's able to get back in, we'll let him introduce himself. But what I wanted to do is move right into some of the questions and some of the topics that I think are really pertinent to how a lot of us are feeling, or some of the thoughts that we're thinking and we're not saying. I want to really just put them on the virtual table, and I want to talk about them. I mean, I've experienced in 2020 some of the things that I've never experienced in my entire lifetime. When I look at the protests and that we've experienced in 2020, I've never seen anything that has swept this country, this world like it. And really, this is a question for all of you. How do you feel about the protests that are going on in the wake of the George Floyd killings? Like, so how does that make you feel? What are your thoughts around that?
Who goes first?
Any one of you. So Larry, if you have an opinion, please share it.
Well, you know, I'm a little bit frustrated. I mean, the Floyd incident was the catalyst, I think, for what's going on. But in my particular opinion, I think it's more media driven than anything else. If the headline was that an innocent man was murdered by a bad cop, I'm not sure that we'd be here right now. But as soon as you start mentioning race, color, or national origin, this whole thing has been blown so far out of proportion that for me, it just is nothing but media driven.
Okay. All right. That was definitely one of the topics I was going to cover later on. So thank you for touching on that. Tom, what are some of your thoughts?
I agree. I think, first of all and foremost, any death of anybody is a tragedy. And we need to be able to stop these things from occurring. And if it's in our control to stop things, which I totally believe that this should never have occurred with Mr. Floyd, if there were other things in place and other trainings in place, that this would not have happened. I really think that it's a matter of good and evil, and a matter of good people and bad people, and how the good people are trained to react and to work with situations like the situation that was there, where we had an incident that a lot of things have occurred that not everybody's privy to. We don't know all the situation of actually what's going on. We've seen what's happened, and we know that those officers were wrong and should be imprisoned, but we don't know all the background information. And we as a people tend to react specifically on what we see, instead of getting all the information and making a full decision and educated decision to steer our ideals to that direction, to make the proper evaluation of what's happened.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for your truth. Dr. Brian, I look to you. What are your thoughts on the protests that are going on, and even some of the comments that have already been made?
I think that I would agree in the sense that I think we are here because we were able to visually see as a country a man slowly be murdered, right? Over an 8-minute period, we watched a man slowly murdered by people who are obligated technically to protect and to serve, right? Had we not had that video, would we be here? Probably not. Not at this moment. That said, I think we should be should not reduce the current protest to George Floyd. I think the protests are largely a response to white supremacist social structures, not necessarily good and bad people, but bad systems that prioritize white people and marginalize Black folk, right? And I think Floyd's death, or murder rather, is one example of how those systems produce inequitable outcomes, but it's not the fundamental reason why we're having the protest today. The protests are about a larger systemic issue. Simply about, not say simply, but not solely about the most recent murder of a Black person.
I agree with most of what you said there, Doctor. The only thing that I think that would be different in my mind is I do believe that this was the spark that stemmed all of this protest. Now, I do want to say is that I agree that the protesting is a good, positive thing for our country. It's the rioting that comes with the protesting that overshadows the good that the good people are doing. And then what happens is the focus turns to the rioting and to the destruction. And that's the part of it that has to stop. There is no doubt that there is racism in America. The question is how are we dealing with it? And is it widespread and institutionalized, or is it in today's society spread out into specific pockets? And that's my belief, as I think that the racism is in specific pockets and it's spread out and it is being pushed down and suppressed. And at times like this, I think that there are incidences that come out and show their dirty side. And that is why we are here now trying to mitigate what's been going on and trying to fix the underlying problems, which you are correct, is the racism and the systemic racism that still does exist in these pockets. In terms of holistic societies, I don't think that today, I don't think that we have the racism that we had 10 years ago. I think that there's a lot of changes that have been made, and I've seen people of all colors and all races get into positions of power, all the way up to the president, generals in the army, social services, education. We see people of all races there. The problem is when you have a person who is a racist in power, that's where you start getting the problems, because that person will need to be removed in order to stop whatever they are contributing towards the perpetuation of the racism.
Okay. All right.
I can agree with Tom to a great degree, but what I fail to understand is, these riots and even the riots and looting, more importantly, the destruction of American history. What in God's name does Mr. Floyd's death have to do with tearing down statues, taking pictures out of the White House? Where is all this coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Where is this coming from? I don't understand.
I think I could answer that. It's coming from the anger that certain cultures have suppressed and have not vocalized. So what's happened is now we've had a possibly racially issue that has come out, and the uprising has come because they're just saying, I'm done with this. We need to speak out, where a lot of people of all colors and cultures have not spoken out. So this became a platform basically to start doing things. And unfortunately, the rioters are not the protesters. The rioters are not the good people who want to get things done. The rioters are a nail in our shoe trying to stop us from getting to where we want to be. And it's pretty clear that the news is involved in this because they're only trying to get their agenda passed instead of what the real issues are that need to be addressed. The real issues of stopping the racism wholly throughout the country. But when you commit crimes and you do rioting, that's not part of this protest. And it's very clear with most of these organizations that are involved that it is not their goal to riot. They don't want rioting. The Floyd family came out and publicly condemned the rioting. There's no
But my
reason for
point
rioting
is
to
that
bring everything down.
no
Okay,
one
all
on the
right.
peaceful
So,
protest side of this argument is doing anything in their power in masses to stop the looting and rioting. If the
So,
looters and
so,
rioters
yeah,
are such a small portion, why can't the protest stop them?
so
all
I would
right.
say, so I respond to a couple different things. One, I think it's very dangerous to try to relegate racism to small pockets. And the reason why I say that is if you look at every major social institution in our country, healthcare, education, criminal justice, and employment. If you look at those four, those are the four pillars of our entire country. Their outcomes, whites disproportionately do better, blacks disproportionately do worse in every social system, which suggests that it's not so much about individual people as it is about the very systems that govern people, right?
Mhm.
That makes racism widespread. So it's the proverbial fish in the lake, right? If you see one dead fish on the shore of a lake, you automatically assume there's something wrong with that fish. But if you see thousands of dead fish on the shore of a lake, it's logical that you then start to question what's wrong with the lake. And right now, disproportionately in every social system, Black people have disproportionately worse outcomes. And as a result, they are laying on the shores of the lake, which suggests that there's something fundamentally wrong about the water. Now, if you want to talk about bad people, that's a different conversation, right? It's hard to gauge people, but what you can gauge is what systems produce. Systems are designed to produce a particular thing, right? And you can tell what that system's designed to produce by what it produces. Apple trees give birth to apples, orange trees give birth to oranges. That's how it goes. If your criminal justice system has 60 to 70% of the population are Black people, but Black people only make 13% of the US population, then it was designed to produce that, right? So I think that's one thing. In terms of like the monuments and the history itself is a lot of what you're seeing is a tearing down of a history that celebrates the oppression of people who look like me, right? So if I'm walking into an arena or a bookstore or a library and I see the faces and the symbols of things that fought to oppress me, I even say the rebel flag, right? The rebel flag stood for a group of people who were trying to make sure that I stayed enslaved. There's no way around that, right? And if I see the rebel flag flying outside of my library, every time I see that as a Black person, I am reminded that this is part of the country that wanted to keep me as a slave. So
All right.
I removed? Yes, I do.
Yeah. So, and I think we're going, this is great conversation. This is what we're here for. And I think we're going into some of the other topics. I know we started on the media and we're talking about, the Confederate flag and et cetera. And these are some of the things that we need to further our impact. I do want to say two things. I just received a text asking me what my opinion is. I want to let you guys understand, to the audience here, my opinion is not as a panelist. It's not to tell you or persuade anyone one way or another. I'm here to moderate and I'm here as your host. So right now, my opinion does not matter, okay? So these are my guests and I will treat them as such. And I hope that you all can respect my guest such as I will, and respect that I will not persuade or give my opinion. Anyone is open to have an interview with me at another time if they like. With that being said, please keep the comments coming. I see some great conversation going. At the end of this, we will take some live questions that we feel are relevant to this conversation. Some ground rules that we've discussed: we will not be name calling or berating or disrespectful to each other. No one has been disrespectful at all to us so far, and I'm hoping that we can keep that positive momentum going. The only reason I'm going through this again is that we're getting our numbers up as viewers, guys, and someone just asked for us to introduce the guest once more. We have Dr. Bryant. Dr. Bryant, if you don't mind giving us a quick wave of Africana Studies, and so much more. I mean, you can give a quick introduction again, since we have so many more viewers if you like. I don't want to downplay it.
All right, my name is Dr. Bryant. I am a professor in the School of Social Work and in the Department of Africana Studies at University of Carolina in Charlotte. I am here hanging out with Tom and Larry, who I already like.
Yeah.
Just here to have a good conversation and learn from each other.
Yep. And then Tom?
I'm Tom Galbo. I'm currently an auctioneer in Palm Harbor, Florida. I have a background in criminal justice. I have a bachelor's degree.
Right.
I've worked in law enforcement in just about every form of criminal justice, including juvenile justice and security, and also been a firefighter.
Awesome. Larry, you there?
I'm here. My name's Larry Marville. I'm retired originally from Cape Cod. I live in Florida now. I do a little yacht captain work, and I'm here just to further my understanding of the social injustice in the country right now.
Yes, yes. And I'm going to tell you guys something. I met, if you guys don't mind, Larry and Tom, I met Larry and Tom via social media. We had some fun encounters, to be quite frank with you. So, and it's actually flourished, and we've been having those private conversations. And Dr. Bryant, I met you a couple of weeks ago, and I'm just encouraged by all of the wealth of information and knowledge that you have. And I just wish that I could just do some weird reverse osmosis and get some of that knowledge in my head, you know? We have one more guest that is having some challenges. I was just checking in with him. And he is currently trying to get back in. His name is Derek Redding, who will join us as soon as possible. But moving right along, I think that we have some good conversation and some great points there. And I want to dive a little bit deeper into some of those things that we've already started to talk about. So piggybacking off of that conversation that we just had around, it's not just the killing of George Floyd. People are fed up. Tom, what are your thoughts about police use of force? Like, I think Dr. Bryant said it. We watched. It felt like the slow killing of George Floyd, even though he was a catalyst, in my opinion. We watched the slow killing of George Floyd, and to hear him call out "Mama," I think it did something to anybody who's a mama's heart. But you hear about all these things and you see that video. Help us unpack further what your thoughts are around how police use force.
Sure. First of all, it was absolutely the death of Mr. Floyd was horrific. The force that was used by at least one of those officers was completely unjustified, and as we've spoken in the past, I believe led to his death. There were other circumstances that were involved that are fairly irrelevant, considering the end result was the death of Mr. Floyd at the hands of somebody that we entrusted to protect us. And the people that were there in uniform who should have gone out of their way to protect Mr. Floyd, regardless of what he had done or what he had in his system, they should have been out there to try to protect him and to try to stop the wrongdoings, because as a police officer, you take an oath to protect the people who can't protect themselves. And in that incident, he could not protect himself, and the other two officers did not do what they needed to do to protect him. Now, in law enforcement and in the academy, they're very specific on how force can be used. And there are levels of force and times when that force can be used, and there are systems in place to punish the people that use excessive force. The internal affairs departments with every law enforcement agency are in place so that if something like this does occur, that the proper investigations can be done and brought people to justice. Now, as you go across the country, every department doesn't talk. They don't have all the same standard operating procedures. But in general, the one thing that they have is a force matrix, which tells police officers, and they're very, very clearly trained on how to use force, starting off with simple presence, just being there at an incident is considered force by law enforcement. Once you have force, speaking to somebody is then the next level, and then it goes up from there. And when use of force is done properly and done by the book, then it is justified. Now, you're never going to find your justification in an incident. You're not going to find it on the scene. You're going to have an investigation done and background done from the incident. With the George Floyd scenario, now they did charge him very quickly, but in several other cases where there have been a incident of excessive force, which, please mind you, I believe that excessive force and racism should be addressed in two different issues. If you have an excessive force issue, you need to address that first, and then address whether the officers were using any sort of racism or were racist themselves. Those are two separate incidents that should be investigated separately so that you can get a holistic picture of what has happened. And just like Larry had said earlier, if you remove the race and you say this man was killed by this police officer, then things would have gone much differently. Now, in this particular scenario, you had lots of people taking videos, so those videos turned into evidence, and that was able to be used as partial evidence. And of course, I agree that there are two sides to every story, or three sides, and everybody has their own input. And it takes all of these inputs and all of this evidence put together to make a determination of what actually happened. Now, we can watch a video like the Floyd incident, and we know because he was kneeling on that man's neck, that caused the death. However, there are other circumstances that the justice system needs to be able to properly prosecute and properly charge these individuals. And by using those force matrices and finding out what exactly was done wrong and why was it done wrong. Was it done, number one, was it done because the officers were racist? Was it done because of inappropriate training on how to subdue a subject that was in his situation? Or was it done just because the officer didn't care? You know, we know now that he had a little bit of a problem with Mr. Floyd prior to this incident. So we need to figure out what all these factors are and put them all together and allow the justice system to take its course. And then once that's done, and it's very clear, if we don't like what the justice system has done, there can be appeals and there can be organizations to put together to find out what we can make changes to and what caused these incidences to happen. And if it was racism when it comes to a law enforcement community, because when you're talking law enforcement, you're talking from the top down. The people are the police and the police are the people. We make the laws. We vote for the laws. We have them enacted. So we as a people, no matter in people, I'm not saying color, I'm saying as a people, as a community, need to make the decisions on what's good and what's bad. Just like the city of Tampa recently made the changes about the chokeholds, that they no longer allow chokeholds, and how force is done. But I don't believe that any one incident can spark and show that there is a racial tension anywhere, because you need to be able to identify that. If it's there, and it needs to be dealt with. And the people who show racism in that sort of environment, a law enforcement environment, should be removed from a position, because there should never be anyone who is racist in a law enforcement capacity, because their oath is to protect the people and not to allow this kind of thing to happen. And I can tell you in Pinellas County, from working with the sheriff's department and working for Bel Air Police Department, if anything had come up that we were racist or did something that was racist,
Tom, we're losing you.
and we would have been fired if not brought up.
Tom, we've lost. We can't hear you.
Now, I also know that small towns in Louisiana, some small towns in Georgia, and other southern states have had more problems with these kind of things.
Yeah, Tom.
It's because of what I consider these pockets of racism that continue to occur, and the people who are in power who have that kind of control. And that's where I think that stems from. But as far as the use of force, it is in place on what law enforcement can do and when they can do it. And I know that there are several people in the community who have gone out and gone through some of the law enforcement training with use of force, and they changed their mindset on what they believe occurred, because sometimes you have to make those split decisions, that you don't have time to make a decision what happens. And I can tell you from being in situations, you don't look at at least people that are not racist look at a situation, and then they don't look at that person as being a black person when they're trying to make a decision of whether they're going to shoot them. They're making that decision based on the use of force being used against them, whether it is a verbal situation or the person has a weapon. They're making that decision based on their matrix, their use of force matrix, because they have to write up exactly why they use that force. And by them making their own statements can definitely incriminate them and show if they are racist based on their statements that they have to write and make reports. And a lot of people leave those things out. All these reports are made by police officers after an incident, but nobody releases them. Let's see what Roy needs to see is the whole picture. Find out what was done, why did he do it, and evaluate it based on a holistic factor, and make a decision. But make a decision on the use of force first, and then make a decision and an investigation on whether this was a racially driven incident.
You completely unpack that topic, and I think you said a lot of relevant things to my question, and I do want to give an opportunity to the other panelists to give feedback or ask additional questions or comments around some of your thoughts that you had there. With respect and understanding that you are talking from experience from your previous roles and jobs, et cetera. So Dante, Dr. Bryant, and Larry, opening the floor to you to respond or ask any additional questions to Tom.
Well, I can't disagree by any means with what Tom said, but unfortunately, you can't take back what's already been done. These officers have already been hung, if that's the right term, by the court of public opinion. In my opinion, I don't care what color they are, they're never going to get a complete and fair trial. They've already been condemned by the world, if you will. And unfortunately, that has nothing to do with the riots and the destruction of businesses and public property, personal injury. There's no assigned blame except to those that do it. And I don't believe that you can do that in the name of peaceful protest. We as a people find excuses for everything. And there is no excuse for what's going on, black, white, pink, or purple, in this country right now.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying, but what I want you to understand is that the criminal justice system is flawed in a lot of ways, but they will get a fair trial for these officers, and it's going to be based on the totality of the evidence, not any one piece of evidence, but the entire situation. Now, we may not like the outcome, but we have to believe in our criminal justice system. Otherwise, you just might as well just tear the whole thing down.
Well,
But you also,
what we've done?
No, it has not happened.
The police.
No.
What's going on in Seattle? What's going on in New York? The police.
The news is putting out there. The news is putting out there, trying to make different parts of the country and different people think certain things. You're not getting, the news is not portraying a totality of what's going on. But also, what you're doing is you're grouping every incident together. You're grouping the rioters together with the protesters, and the protesters are good. Now, what the protesters are doing is constitutionally sanctioned, and it is good. What the rioters are doing is breaking the law. And what's happening is a lot of people are putting all the rioters and the protesters together and saying, hey, all these people, that's not about that. The protesters are not doing what the rioters are doing. The rioters are doing an illegal action and are not justified in what they're doing. The protesters are. And as far as the criminal justice system goes, it is in place, and they're going to continue to do what they're going to do, and they're going to prosecute appropriately and do it in a fair manner. Now, when you're talking about not getting a fair trial, that would happen if all you knew was just the video. But they're going to get a totality. These jurors who are going to be picked by both sides are going to make a decision on this case based on the evidence and only the evidence.
Right.
And they're going to be mixed. They're going to be of all races, and they're going to be and the Floyd family is going to pick the ones that they want for their side, and the other sides are going to pick for them. But it will be a fair trial. I believe that. I believe in the system. I've seen it work. And if you don't believe in the system, then you might as well let everybody that's in prison out. Everybody that's in jail, you should just let them out, because what you're saying is that the system is totally not work. Now, there are situations where we need to go back and address people who were arrested wrongfully, because that was done. And I have seen a lot of bad cops in my career. Yeah. And those people have been fired, and those cases have been overturned. You just don't see it in the news.
So Tom, so there a lot said there. Dr. Bryant, let me give you an opportunity to respond, and then I kind of want to move on to another topic if possible. So Dr. Bryant.
Tom, I respect the work that you did, and I don't have the same faith in our judicial system that you do, and it's
understandably.
Yeah, and that's rooted in my personal experiences and the history experiences that I've inherited from generations of Black folk who've been wronged by our criminal justice system, right? And ideally, we would have a system that works for all people, right? And we would just have bad people spaced throughout it, and we can remove those people. Unfortunately, though, a racist system does not. So the idea of implicit bias, like something happens and we make a knee-jerk reaction, it's based on our fundamental education, right? Our primary source of education. And unfortunately, if you were raised in this country, whether you realize it or not, you were raised to be racist, sexist, and classist. That is part of our fundamental education. We've all received this education, right? And it's impossible to live in a society where the air is toxic and not inhaled. It's just impossible. So that said, everyone is impacted, if you were raised here, by those implicit biases, which have an immediate impact on our decision making, which determine how we treat some people versus other people. This is why when you look at sentencing rates, when you control for same criminal record, same criminal activity, Black people are their sentences are 3 to 5 times heavier than their white counterparts, right? For the same crime with the same criminal history, right? This is how our system works. And this is what I mean by a racist system. Doesn't necessarily require racist people, but what it does, people to be actively racist. But what it does require is that people simply function within the system how it was designed to function without ever challenging it.
So Dr. Ryan, that's a perfect segue into one of the questions I wanted to discuss is, Dr. Bryan, do you think that there is systematic oppression and systematic injustices that are occurring in America? I mean, I think you kind of alluded to that, but if you could further give us some insight to some more facts around that, your truth around that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, again, you look at any of our major social systems, right? So we know in healthcare, Black people have worse outcomes than white people, significantly worse, right? Whites come out with the highest level of positive outcomes, Blacks with the lowest level of positive outcomes. My wife, who is a physician, if my wife becomes pregnant, my wife is 3 to 5 times more likely to die during pregnancy and or childbirth than a white woman with a GED and who is poor, right? I know that if I go to see the doctor, I'm 3 to 5 times more likely to be misdiagnosed than my white counterpart. I will have worse healthcare outcomes than my white colleagues. I know the same thing in education. I'm less likely to graduate from high school. I'm less likely to graduate from college. I'm 55% less likely to get even interviewed for a job, even when my white counterpart submits the exact same resume, right? And then even if I do get interviewed, I'm 50% less likely to get offered the job. And if I get the job, I'll make anywhere between 10 to 40% less than my white counterpart who has the same work history, the same educational history, and so forth and so on. right? These are things that are just, these are facts. Like these aren't not opinions. This is what our system produces. Tons of research has been done on it, and this is what it shows us, right? And so you have one or two choices. You can assume that Black people are psychologically, physiologically, and morally inferior to white people, which is why we keep having these distributions. Or you can say, you know what, there's something fundamentally wrong with the system. For me personally, I cannot operate under the assumption that Black people are ontologically, morally, physiologically, and psychologically inferior to white people and or anyone else for that matter, right? Um, therefore I am left to assume that there's something wrong with the systems that we function in. And if the number one determinant of quality of life outcomes, right, and if done research is race, right, not your sexual orientation, not your gender identity, but your race is the number one determinant of where you end up in life, right? If that is the case, and white people consistently end up at, and Black people consistently end up at the bottom, then I'm left to assume that your system prioritizes white people, which makes it by default white supremacist, right? By default racist. And to the extent that Black folks keep ending up at the end, at the bottom, I also have to assume that your systems are anti-Black. And those are three separate activities.
Okay.
You know, if
I'd
I
like to
might
respond. Go ahead.
you know, I can understand what you've just told us, but I can tell you from working alongside many Black people for over 25 years, I can't tell you how many Black apprentices I had. They all got paid the same as the white apprentices. When they became journeymen, they got the same pay, the same benefits as everybody else, no matter their color or natural origin. And I don't think that all the things that you measured can be. I'm not saying that everything is fair. The world is not fair.
Right.
But this is not something that's going to be fixed in a forum. It's not something that's going to be fixed in an election. I honestly don't know how we fix this, but it's been going on for longer than all four of us have ever been alive. And this is something that's been passed down since the beginning of this country. It hasn't been fixed in the last 150 years. And I don't think anybody has any reason to believe that it's going to be fixed in the foreseeable future, riots or no riots. And riots are only going to, prohibit moving forward with all these things.
How do they prohibit moving forward? Just
Can I respond to that real quick?
go ahead, Go ahead, doctor.
So I would say this, that it's great that in your space, people have been paid based on their abilities. That's wonderful. But that is not the norm in our society. Unfortunately, it's not. I wish it were, right? And I commend you for being in that space and making sure that people got equal pay based on what their performance is. And it's not necessarily about fairness as a whole. You're right. Life is not fair, right? But when you consistently have the same outcome, that means something is fundamentally wrong, right? Because fairness means equally distributed bad stuff happens, equally distributed good stuff happens. As far as
the question is, how do you expect that? What do you think this country should do that's going to have any positive impact on that right now today?
Well,
how are we going to flip that switch and make it happen?
Well, let me ask you this. You're saying that it's not going to change anytime soon. The rioters aren't helping. The protesters aren't helping. So me as a person who is most negatively affected by these problems, should I just sit back quietly and say nothing?
No, I think you should. And I think that most people try to do the best they can every single day they wake up and put their feet on the ground.
But how do we change the system?
It does not work every day. And I can understand that some people have a lot more bad days than other people. But that's not something that our politicians can fix.
Well,
I mean, our politicians can't agree on what day of the week it is, never mind what the difference in color is between people.
I would disagree. I would say that it's not only on politicians, But a lot of the problems that we have were put in place because of laws, policies, procedures. Some of this stuff is legislated. Like we've legislated certain things. Like the war on drugs was a profound act of legislation that criminalized Black drug use in the United States versus the opioid epidemic, which looked at drug use in the United States as a mental health crisis.
I lost you, Doc.
Oh, because it was impacting different populations, right? When we had the method, we had crack cocaine affecting Black communities. We issued the war on drugs. We defunded community-based programs. We dumped a whole lot of funding in militarizing the police to go in and deal with this war on drugs. When all of a sudden the demographics shifted, and now we have the opioid epidemic, which over 70% of people impacted by it were white, we abandoned the war on drugs and we went to a therapeutic model, right? This is inequitable actions. And now, instead of incarcerating people who are hooked on drugs, we give them treatment because they look different. So yes, can politicians solve all the problems? No. But are they part of the solution? Yes. As far as protesting and riots and so forth are concerned, nothing changes unless it is forced to change. The society is not going to get better if we just sit back and say, you know what, this is how it is how it's always been. You have to cause discomfort and discontinuity for change to even occur. That's how it happens. And now, will it happen overnight? No. But I think every generation is responsible for contributing to moving the needle forward a little bit each generation. You see what I'm saying?
Do you think that the rioting is appropriate?
I don't think it's appropriate, but I would say this though, right? So when we think about nonviolent resistance versus violent resistance, like rioting or even physical attacks, right? The two have always been paired together. I mean, even if you look at King during the civil rights era, remember 74% of Americans thought that his nonviolent resistant activity was inappropriate.
But he also condemned rioting. He completely condemned rioting.
But hear me out. He did. He was doing nonviolence. And 74% of Americans in 1963, Gallup did a study. This is right after King did I Have a Dream speech. 74% of white Americans said that they disagreed with his nonviolent protest. They said it was inappropriate. Now, what's interesting is when he was working with JF Kennedy to get things passed, JF Kennedy publicly stated, either we do it King's way or we do it Malcolm's way. Who do you want to deal with, right? And I think the threat and the possibility of violence in a society that has largely depended on violence to control people, right? Is it a good thing? No. Does it have a place? It does. I'm not condoning violence in any form or fashion, but to simply be recipients of violence, but not ever react to that violence is not even a reasonable suggestion to make to any human being, right? Because I'm sure none of you believe in violence, but if someone came into your home and threatened your family, suddenly you would be, I doubt that you would protest nonviolently.
Right. But there's a difference between violence. There's a difference between protecting yourself and exercising your right to protect yourself and your home and your family, and going out and destroying somebody's livelihood. Now, these rioters out there have gone out and destroyed Black people's businesses, white people's businesses, Indian businesses. They pulled down statues. Now, and again, I understand the concept of those symbolisms being something that's wrong, but there is a process to have that removed. And these rioters are not doing that, and they're coming from other areas. They're not even involved. They don't even know who George Floyd is in some cases. They've got interviews.
No, I think you're 100% right. And I think that you're right. There's a fundamental difference. And I think that the rioters usually emerge out of opportunists, right? And or sometimes people who are just angry. Like, you know what I mean? And
we punch walls when we get mad sometimes. I know.
Exactly. and again, I'm not condoning it. I understand it. Like for those who are just fundamentally
empathy. That's that thing of empathy, understanding what one is going through, right?
I don't necessarily agree with it, but I do understand it, right?
Okay.
Now, as far as those who are just opportunists, you know what I mean? Like the rioters and the looters, like you have rioters, you have looters, and then you have protesters, right? And they have different, and you've said it earlier, and I appreciate you saying it, they have different agendas, you know, and unfortunately, we get caught up on the looters and the rioters, and we miss the point of the protest, which is unfortunate, You know what I mean?
Yeah. You also get situations where you have the idea of the white privilege coming into play, where you have people who are trying to jump on the bandwagon on either side, who interject their opinions when it doesn't help anything. It just produces more problems.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean? I don't understand that, because that was one of the things I wanted to ask you. Do you believe that white privilege? So how does that relate?
A really good example. A really good example is, and I'm not saying any particular group is bad. I'm not saying anything bad about any one particular group. However, there have been several incidences that I've been privy to where people who claim to be representing Black Lives Matter have walked up to white individuals in public and basically forced them down to their knees with guilt. And these people are going down to their knees, and they're saying, hey, well, I'm sorry for my white privilege. And you have to be able, first of all, you have to agree that white privilege is true. And if these people are apologizing for white privilege, then those are the people that are oppressing the Black people in turn. I don't believe that there's white privilege, but I believe in each incident should be separate and looked at individually. Now, I think there's a class privilege. I think it's really, what we're talking here is just semantics. I believe that the problem that you're talking about when you talk about white privilege is not specific to any one race. And I believe it's a class problem. The upper class that makes more money, the more money you have, the better things that you have in life. I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood in Clearwater, and I was raised in those communities. So I have a different outlook than some of my friends that live up in Ocala, Florida, out in the woods. But I project my opinions on them and share, and I think that comes down to part of what the problem is education. And if we are educated properly, and I agree with you when you say that there is a problem with the education system, that they're not appropriately teaching. But I think that it goes in both ways. I think that there are problems with people who have been systemically wronged in life, and that has caused them to have a particular outlook on something. Just like if you get a bag of grapes and you take a grape out of that bag and you pop it in your mouth and that grape is rotten, you're less likely to go back in that bag of grapes to get out another grape. And I think that is what the problem is that we have to individualize situations. Don't say, in my mind, I don't want to look at everything as being a racist system. I want to go in and I want to address the racism that exists in each system, because there is racism that exists in every system. And I agree with you on that. And it should be our goal to eliminate that. But in order to do that, we have to take each individual system and attack it and attack the problem in turn. When something comes up, you attack that problem. And it's just like, when you get a cold. When you get a cold, you treat that cold. But I don't believe that there is a widespread white privilege that just because I'm white, I'm going to get something. I believe that it is the system that is put in place where the people who have money, the people who have power, want to remain in power. And by putting down people of all colors. Now, if you're in power, let's give a good example.
There's anything to do with color. It's all about class. So.
I think it's all about class and all about power. And the reason why I say that is because I'll give you an example. My 6-year-old daughter plays with the little black boy next door all day long. And there's no racism there at all. They come over here, we buy food for them, they buy food for us. There's no inequality between these two children, and they love each other completely. And that is what I encourage. Now, when you start getting into situations where you start being wronged by somebody of another color, which you led on to having had those situations where you have been wronged by somebody in your past who was white, or in one situation or another. So you automatically, as a human, will start to look at what you can do to change that. And you may not look at any one particular culture as that being a problem. Now, as you keep eating those grapes and you keep getting bad grapes, you're going to hate that those grapes even more. And you might get to a point where you won't ever eat a green grape again because you've eaten so many bad grapes.
Well, let me ask you this. So I eat the bad grapes, and one of the grapes is bad, right? And then I eat another grape, it's good, and then I eat 5 more grapes, and those grapes are bad. If enough of the grapes are bad, I have to assume that there is something wrong with the vine that they came from.
Well, you have to. I get that. You have to assume that.
So when you're talking about, I agree with you. We need to address the racism in every system individually, right? I totally agree with that. Law enforcement, education, health.
Individual.
Yeah, exactly. Each individual system. Now, in terms of like the white privilege piece, understand privilege is not always that you get something. Sometimes it means that you're immune from certain things, right? So by definition, privilege means an immunity of certain things. So like when you're talking about class status, I'm wealthy. My wife is an MD. I'm a doctor. We live financially. We are set, right? I live in a neighborhood where most of the people are in our similar a higher economic
social status, exactly. Social classes.
When I drive in my neighborhood on several occasions, I was stopped by a law enforcement officer asking me why I was in the neighborhood. Right now, there are white people who drove right past me who the law enforcement officer did not stop. There are 388 homes in our neighborhood. Right? There was no reason for him to stop me coming into my neighborhood other than the fact that I was a Black person.
But why did you not take that up with local law enforcement?
Well, I did, but my issue with my I did, but my point is that my white colleagues were not stopped. Right? That's the privilege. They were able to gracefully go to their homes without interruption. I've walked my dog in my neighborhood and had neighbors come out and ask me if I live there, right? And this is what I mean by like privilege is sometimes that you're not exposed to certain things, that you don't have to deal with certain things.
So,
it's not just giving you something.
So do you think that we, and I'm one of those people that I think you just described. So should I apologize for the fact that I may be white and be privileged?
No, I don't think you apologize for being white and being privileged. I think what you do is understand that privilege, like I'm a man. I know in this country, I have certain privileges that women don't have. That's just the reality of it, right? Certain things I don't have to think about that my wife does, right? I don't think about when I stop to get gas, I don't think about what time it is. I don't think about whether it's nighttime. I stop and do what I need to do. My wife has to think to herself, I am a woman out here by myself. Should I get gas in the morning before I go to work when the daylight is out, or do I go at nighttime after the sun's going down?
Well, so I know that describe the reason that I'm here, because I can't imagine my wife or myself. I have never, and I've lived all over the country, I have never once given thought to what time of the day and night it is that I go get gas, and either has
exactly. And that's a privilege.
But at the same time, all of these places that I have been throughout the country, day and night, I've seen people of color, all different ethnic backgrounds, but I have no way of knowing whether they're worried or whether they're comfortable.
Exactly. And so so when you're talking about your wife, like you never thought about it, neither had I until my wife brought it up. But the fact that we didn't have to think about it as men, that's a privilege. So I think what we do is, if you have a privilege, you shouldn't necessarily apologize for it, but I think you use that privilege to help protect those and to care for those who don't have the privilege. So my wife, what I can do for her in the gas scenario is, you know what, babe, I'll go get the gas for you because I recognize it's nighttime. You don't want to go. It's not safe for you to go. You see, so I use my privilege and my power and my resources to help protect those who don't necessarily have the same privileges, right? And to fight.
In my case, I might do the same thing, and I might go get the gas from my wife because it's nighttime, but not because I feel that either one of us are privileged. I just think from a gentleman's point of view, that's the right thing to do because she's my wife or whatever. I don't look at that as a racial incident.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand. I was using it as an example. And so what I'm saying is that sometimes privilege isn't about somebody giving you something. A lot of times privilege is about you not having to worry about certain things, you not having to deal with certain things. And the thing is, everybody has privilege. Like, I have certain privileges that the people next to me don't have. And in certain environments, our privilege varies. Like, in some places you might have more privilege, in other places you might have less privilege, right? And privilege takes all kinds of forms: gender, a sexual orientation, race, you know what I mean? But to feel guilty because you have privilege is not productive. To feel bad because you have privilege is not productive. What's productive is that when we have privilege, we use that privilege to protect and to empower those who don't have the same privileges. That's the best thing we can do.
Right. Absolutely. All right.
Did we lose some people here?
Yeah, I think it's just me and you, Larry.
Yeah, we lost Tom.
Did we scare them all off?
Yeah. That's the beauty of doing a virtual, I'd say, panel interview. We're trying, in the midst of COVID, to socially distance and be safe. So we have a little bit of a challenge trying to use different platforms. But this is some great conversation that's going on. I think that I had my mind a lot of questions, a lot of topics I wanted to hit, and you guys are naturally hitting those topics. We have some great questions that are coming from the audience. And some of them are for you, Dr. Bryant, and some of them for Tom, Larry. So I would love to jump into a couple of those live questions because we are at an hour. I know it didn't feel like an hour, but we're at an hour already, and get some of those questions. So I am able to show this question here. So this is from Allison Bradley. Her question is for you, Dr. Bryant. You said that I'm a man and I know I have privilege, and it is what it is. We cannot allow one privilege to be fine and not others. If we're going to change privilege, it needs to be changed across the board. There needs to be a solution for everybody. And I would just say, Allison, I agree with that. And if you guys notice that I did have an all male panel, the reason that I had that male panel is because I understand that there's a lot of different privileges that we would want to discuss. This is part one. I will have a women's panel. So if anyone's interested in being on my women's panel, please, privately message me. And then we're going to have a round two where we bring back a few folks from, the women and the men's panel and share some of those thoughts. But I definitely understand, Allison, where your concern is and what your question is. And I give you an opportunity, Dr. Bryant, to address if you'd like.
Yeah, no, Allison, I agree with you 100%. And when I say it is what it is, what I'm saying is that we inherit a lot of privileges just by default, right? Like, I inherit certain privileges as a man. I had no say in inheriting those privileges, but I did inherit them. Now, what I do have, and so that part is what I mean by it is what it is. Now, should we change those systems that created that type of privilege? Definitely. But what I was really trying to get at was, I woke up, I'm a male, I'm identified as a male, a hetero cisgendered male, right? Which has all kinds of privileges tied up into it. I inherit those privileges. Now the question is, once I become aware of those privileges and how others are denied similar types of privileges, what do I then do? Does it serve me to sit and feel guilty about it? Does it serve me to feel apologetic about it? Or do I actively try to change the systems that created this disproportionate privilege? And do I actively use my privilege to help protect those who don't have similar privileges while we're simultaneously trying to change the systems? So I didn't mean it as a dismissal of my privilege by any stretch of the imagination, just as a recognition that we do inherit things. Right. And it's an inheritance that we don't have any say in. But once we've inherited it, we then have the obligation and the ability to change the things for the next generation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for answering that. And guys, we're open for questions. If anyone else has any questions, there were a couple of them for Tom, but unfortunately, oh, there's Tom. Tom's back. Hello, Tom.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Absolutely.
Can I say something about the privilege part of this thing?
Yes, you can absolutely respond.
Can you hear me?
Tom, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yep. Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, well, Dr. Bryant, you spoke about you spoke about the fact that we may not even be aware of the privileges, that it's something we were born with or whatever. But don't you think that unless an individual who believes that he's privileged stops and thinks about people that may or may not be privileged, he has a natural instinct to better himself. And if just by virtue of the fact that you're a man, you have more privileges than a woman or some other person, isn't it human nature for people with like privileges and like feelings to promote those feelings? And isn't it a human instinct to be superior? Not necessarily black or white, but just be superior in what you do and where you go, and not worry so much about the people beneath you, but worry about reaching the people that are above you to get to the goals that you might have.
So I would say this. I think that one of the privileges of privilege is the fact that you don't have to think about the fact that you have privilege, right? Like that's one of the oxymorons, right? Do I think it's a natural instinct for people to want to better themselves? Yes. Do I think that it's a natural instinct for people to not think about the people who don't have what they have and strive to be like the people who have more than them? I don't think that that's natural. I think that's the product largely of socialization. Um, if you grow up in a society, I don't think that that's natural. I think that's the product. I have a lot of people that know what's going on right now. Oh, if you grow up in a society or in a community or whatever it may be that ingrains in you to care for those who do not have what you have, then that becomes what you do, right? But if you grow up in a capitalist society where it's all about I need to acquire as much what you have you possibly can because they're limited, and I need to make sure that I have them. That means someone else doesn't have them. If you grow up in that environment, which is the environment we largely live in socially, then yes, I think you will naturally strive to be better and not care about the people who have less, right? But I don't think that's a human nature. I think that is a social issue.
Well, the reason that I believe it's human nature is because a lot of the things that we've talked about tonight have been, it's racial issues, black versus white, in a predominantly white society. And I think that this is an argument that's gone on through history from the days of the Romans conquering the European states. And, now we come to this country and we left the European society because we wanted to be free. And, this whole thing about the race issue, I mean, I get it. There are racist people in this country, but I think very, very few people that I've ever been involved in or any place I've ever lived wake up in the morning and worry about whether they're racist or not racist. They're worried about getting the job done for the day, trying to better themselves and move on. And the media is what spreads all this racism crap. I know a lot of people, hundreds of them, and I don't know one person that has a bad thing to say about an individual because he's of color or because he's less privileged than you or I or anyone else. If you create a situation where you screw up or make a bad name for yourself or do stupid things, yeah, people are going to call you out. You're going to have to socially prepare yourself to pay the price for being an idiot. But in this country, that's not the way it works anymore. People are led by politicians like they got a leash on them. And if they're not part of the solution, they're not part of then they're part of the problem. If you don't completely agree with me, then you're my enemy. And to me, that's what the problem is in this country with people. People don't talk open-minded like we are tonight. It's my way or the highway.
Understood. Absolutely. And actually, there was a question for you. I'm going to take about 3 more questions. We've been on a little bit over an hour, and I want to allow the panelists to have some closing thoughts. I think that we've touched on a lot of topics that are at the top of our minds and that sometimes put heavy weight on our shoulders and our hearts. So we're going to talk about some next steps, some actions. What can you do when you leave this broadcast to continue on? So what I wanted to do is offer up a couple of questions. And the next question that I have, it is for you actually, Tom. I'm going to play that. It is from Liz McDrayer for Tom. Do you think police/police unions cover up bad acts by individual officers out of misplaced loyalty? And how prevalent is this?
All right, so that kind of goes down to the idea of the thin blue line. And I will say that it does exist in some people's minds. In some officers, it does exist where they will go out of their way to try to cover up. Now, unfortunately for them, you can't cover these things up. Nowadays, with cameras and everybody having video recorders and phone cameras, you can't cover up these bad actions. And if somebody does try to cover up those bad actions, they should be immediately fired, disciplined, and charged. There should be a crime. This should be a crime for covering up the actions of a bad cop. And these things are not as rampant as they used to be 10, 15 years ago because of the way that things have changed. Just like some of the conversation we had earlier with Doctor here, the scenarios that are occurring now are different than what occurred 10, 15 years ago. The statistics that are being used to judge how we do things today, not saying anything with you, Dr. Bryant, but statistics today are skewed based on what they used to be. You can't use statistics 10 years ago to deal with the George Floyd incident today. George Floyd's incident should be identified for what it is, what has happened, and taken as an individual situation and taken apart from that situation to determine what the problems are. If the problem was excessive force, then that should be addressed. If the problem was found to be racism, that should be addressed. But when it comes down to officers covering for other officers, I don't believe that is as widespread as it used to be. Does it happen? Yes, it absolutely happens. But it also determines what department you're talking about. Are you talking about the city of New York, who has thousands of officers, or are you talking about the town of Bel Air that has 25 officers? So you really have to look at the systems individually instead of grouping everything together. And that's kind of been my whole point here through the entire scenario here is you have to look at each individual system. If an officer commits a crime, which they do, because if you have to look at in terms of each officer as an individual contractor, basically. The police department is run by the people. The laws are made by the people. If there is a systemically racist law, that has to be changed by voting, by all of the people voting. And that means everybody has to get out and vote. Not any one particular culture, not any one particular color. Everybody has to vote to make the decisions on what should happen. And if that happens, then you won't have these incidents where somebody's trying to cover it up. I also believe that every police officer out there should have cameras in their cars and cameras on their bodies. Then there's going to be less likely any kind of concern about an incident happening, which absolutely goes both ways. You have people out there in the field who will try to make the officers look bad so that they can get away with the crimes that they've just committed. And it doesn't matter. And again, I'm not saying color, I'm saying people, because people will do whatever they can to try to get them from being in trouble, to try to not get punished. And it doesn't matter if the law doesn't have color. There's no color. If you break into a store and you steal something, that's the same charge, no matter what color you are. And what Dr. Bryant had said earlier about how different people of different races with the same charges in the same scenario, becomes a racial issue. The problem with that is that each issue has to be addressed. And if the court is doing what they're supposed to be doing, it may give the appearance of privilege to one group, but not to another. But if you're talking about two different crimes, even though it's the same charge, there are different circumstances within each crime. You just never know. And with that, the judge has to make the decision. So if the judges are bad, then they should be removed and then replaced with judges that are not bad. But until something happens, like the George Floyd incident, they didn't know that police department may have had some problems that they didn't have addressed. But now they do. But you don't want to dismantle everything because the people paid for that. The people paid for the police department. I'm not talking about just white people or black people. Everybody in the community that lives there in was Minneapolis, they are all responsible for paying for those police cars. They're all responsible for paying the salaries for those police officers, including the police officers. The idea that a police officer is just a public servant and you got to do what they want you to do is a farce, because the police officers are paying taxes too. So they're paying their own way through. So you have to look at each individual incident and address the issues that are underlying in the incident once the incident is resolved. So what I'm saying is once you've determined if that person broke into the house and they're guilty of that crime, then you can determine, did they break into that house because the person was white, or did they break into it because they had more money? We don't know. You have to look at it and break it down. And if we stop looking at things in terms of black or white or good cop, bad cop, and start addressing the law with the police officers, if they do their job and they do it the way that we say they're supposed to do it, which is a standard operating procedure that is adopted by the department, run by the chiefs or the sheriffs who make those decisions, and those people are voted in or elected by the people, then that stuff will stop. Those things will go away. And there's a lot less today than there was 20 years ago. And we are getting better, but we have to focus on addressing the issues instead of addressing a larger problem that cannot be fixed. You're not going to fix overnight racism, but you can fix a bad cop.
All right. Any responses or questions to Tom's? Dr. Bryant, you're on mute. Let me see if I can unmute you. You're on mute, Dr. Bryant. Okay.
I would say it's not an either or. I would say you do both. I think you have to work, when you're talking about changing society, you have to do both. You have to work on the individual level, or the micro level, or the bottom, and you also have to simultaneously work from the top. I think if you choose to do one of those, if you're only working on the individual level, then my theory is that you cannot solve individual problems faster than systems can create them, right? Mm-hmm. You just can't. So, but at the same time, systems take time to change. And if you're only focused on systems, then people are suffering on the individual level while that's happening. But if you focus only on the individual, your system's going to create more victims faster than you can heal them. So I think you have to do both simultaneously. You have to work at the individual level, and you have to work at the systems level. Mm-hmm. And I think the two of those come together, making kind of like a sandwich, right?
And I understand that.
I think you do both. I think to neglect either one of those is extremely problematic, right? And will either produce more suffering, right, or never change what needs to be changed.
In terms of what you're saying, I understand completely, and I agree with it. I agree with you 100%. But you're talking about, I think we're kind of talking about apples and oranges in terms of what our view and what we're thinking. The way that I'm trying to portray this is on a level of incidences. You can work on policy and procedure at the same time you're addressing a specific incident. But I believe that you need to separate the incident that has occurred from the policy changes. You make the policy changes based on the incident that has occurred. The incidents that occur help to make the changes of the policy. So by individualizing an incident, you can allow the incident to resolve and then make a policy on the other side of it that will stop this particular thing from happening. So I agree, it does have to happen simultaneously, but individually, that each incident has to be looked at without looking. The George Floyd incident, you have to take that incident before you take it and look at it and try to say this is a racial incident, because people were saying it was a racially motivated incident before anything came out. And I don't know that there's ever actually been anything to show that the George Floyd incident was anything more than this bad cop doing a bad thing to a person. And that's the bottom line. I'm not going to say he was a good person. I'm not going to say he was a bad person, because I don't know his background. But a cop who was entrusted to do something right did something bad to somebody else. That has to be addressed. And if it's addressed and it's found that this was a racially charged incident, then that could be addressed outside of that. But when you combine everything, you cause this complete disarray. And I'm not saying that the rioting is wrong and illegal. So the protests are positive and good for our country.
So I will say this: you as a white male can parse out race versus action. Right? Like when I show up in the space, I don't show up as a male and then black. Right? When people see me, they simultaneously see both. And they respond to me, not just me being a male, not just me being black, but because I'm a black male. So I exist at that intersection. Same thing with women, right? If a woman walks into a space, people immediately see that it's a woman. If it's a woman of color, so it's difficult for me to determine, are you treating me this way? Because everyone is socialized to respond to black bodies in a particular way. Our entire history of our country has told you your education from the time that you were born in this country to right now, your education formally and informally, TV, media, your textbooks in school have told you that white people are good, black people are bad.
I've never seen that.
You know what I mean?
Thought that.
No, but that I'm not. But listen, that is the power of an education. The most powerful thing you've been taught in your life is the thing that you're not aware of. Right? That is the thing that has the most powerful impact on you. Your entire education taught you that everything started in Europe, Greece and Rome. It's been Eurocentric. You learned about white people discovering America when they slaughter people to get it, right? We celebrate Christopher Columbus Day. The people who were on our money were slave owners, right? But we lift them up as heroes because you have been taught that these people are good people, right? But we've also been taught that black people are bad people. And this is part of the education that we've all received, right? And you can't tell me that does not have an impact on how you function in society. Because most of you, I'm assuming, we're in our mid-40s. Up until 1980, there were no black people on TV.
I agree with you.
But that you don't think that had an impact. You and up until the Cosby Show, you never saw a black professional on your television. You did not.
The Jeffersons were rich.
They were the only one. They were the only one. But if you looked at the roles, they actually did a study where they looked at the roles that black people portrayed up until 1980. The overwhelming majority were mammies, slaves, and criminals.
I disagree.
How about professional athletes?
Yeah, you got. I think 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, I think you're right. But I can tell you that I grew up and one of my favorite shows in the 80s was The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. That's about a rich black family. The Jeffersons. I used to watch the Jeffersons all the time. I used to watch several other shows that depicted, black families. But I wasn't exposed to that before I moved into the black community that I was in. But I know because of the way that I was taught, and maybe it's because I've come from
Hey, Tom, how many of your teachers were black?
I'd say 50%.
50. Where'd you go to school at?
I went to John F. Kennedy Middle School. I went to Sandyland Elementary School. I went to Clearwater High School. And then I went to...
was not 50% black teachers. I know that for certain.
Teachers. No, you're saying teachers in the school.
Oh, yeah.
Tom, teachers in the school opposed to what my teachers were.
Okay. When you went to college, how many black professors did you have?
I had 3 black professors.
Okay.
One was a black female.
Okay.
Probably, and I would say that she was one of the best criminal justice.
That's wonderful. So in 4 years of college, you had 4. So that's one a year.
Okay, I can remember that. I remember now. I don't remember all my teachers.
No, I get that. So all I'm saying is that we've all received a certain type of education in our society. We've been taught that men are better than women, right? And that white people are better than black people. Like
you have. I haven't. That's not how I was raised. That's not what I was taught.
Well, it's not about. I'm not talking about what your family values are. Like that's different, right? And even though we all have countering experience, I mean, clearly, I'm a black person. My parents didn't teach me that black people were bad, right? They didn't.
You're talking about the subliminal, just to like unpack it further.
Things that we're not always aware of, that are educating us all the time, right? And we don't necessarily know that those things are having an impact on us.
Now, let me ask you this, Dr. Bryant. Do you believe that the racism that is existing in today's society goes both ways, both blacks to whites and whites to blacks? Would you agree with that?
Well, racism requires power. So I think so racism as a operational definition? No. Are there black people who don't like white people? Yes. Now, that said, if I don't like a white person, right? If as me as a person, if I say, you know what, I don't like any white people, right? The question is, and I think all white people are the devil. If I have that belief, I think all white people are thieves and that they're criminals, right? Am I in a position to impose that onto another white person in a way that impacts their lives, right? And that's where racism actually requires to have power to impose your views on someone else in a way that definitively changes their life. So are there black people that don't like white people? Yes. Are there white people who do not like black people? Yes. In terms of who has the power to enact racism, right? Then that would be white people. Yes.
Do you agree that it's white people in power and that have money, or do you think it's white people in general, as a whole, as the community of white people?
I think that we are all socialized, black, white, and otherwise, right? Again, to look at white people as the ideal and look at black people as the negative. I think we're all taught that. Now, does that mean we're all actively racist? No, I don't. I don't think that the majority of people are actively racist, right? I don't think the majority of people would even identify as being actively racist. But in same token, I don't think that most men would identify as being actively sexist, right? But I'm pretty certain that all of us were taught and socialized to be sexist in some form or fashion. And so it shows up in our lives, even though we may not consciously even support it. And the reality is we may be avidly against it, right? Like I am avidly against sexism and the marginalization of women. But my wife is always holding me accountable to little things that I do that I never even noticed because I was socialized a certain way. So do I think that all white people are actively consciously racist? No. I think that all whites, anybody who was raised in this country was raised to believe that white people are better, and white men in particular, and white heterosexual men even more particular, that they're at the top of the food chain, and that black people are at the bottom.
Boy, I missed out on that somewhere because I didn't get any of that privilege when I was growing up.
I got my. This is the type of.
If you went through 40 years of living in this country and you didn't receive any of that,
no.
I
came from being on welfare when I was a kid. I went through school on my own. I came from a single family home. I came up, put myself through college. I put myself in the military, and I think this is part of the difference in my wavelength of thinking is because I'm military. My military way of thinking is that everybody's green. We don't look at color. So when I look at
military did though, right? The military did for a long time. But I get the point though. In the foxhole, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter in society. I can tell you that if I walk into Walmart to go buy something, I'm not going to be treated any different than anybody else. I've had security follow me around in the store just like anybody else has because they're looking at specific instances. Now, when I've worked in law enforcement, I worked beside people of all races. But I can tell you that I could go to a situation with any color and have a problem. Okay, so it didn't make a difference no matter, because I was a police officer and everybody's looking at my uniform. They didn't care whether I was white or black. But it's just situations in law enforcement when you're dealing with cultures. You get certain cultures that won't deal with you. Like if you get with the Asian cultures, you don't want to talk to the ladies in the Asian culture. You need to talk to the men. That's part of their culture. The men want to talk, and that's only specific Asian cultures too, and that's not the Americanized Asian cultures in a lot of cases. But you have to look at, as far as me having any kind of privilege, because I can tell you it wasn't the case with me and my family. And I wasn't taught any of the things that you think that were taught to me. And if that was the case, then why?
Tom, we're losing you.
Why do we have black generals in the military? I believe that the current general in charge of the attorney, not the attorney general, but the medical general, he's black. We have black principals, we have black teachers, we have black store owners. If what you're telling me is the truth and it was so far out there, how is this occurring?
Because we always have exceptions. Like they have a theory called exceptionalism, right? So like in the United States, according to a 2015 study, economic mobility study, only 20% of people change the socioeconomic status that they were born in, which means if you were born middle class, there's an 80% chance that you will die middle class. Right? In my city, in Charlotte, it's 98% chance you'll die middle class, right? Similar as in Washington, D.C. Now, let's say nationally, 80% of people die in the same economic class they were born in, right? That means only 20% of people actually do what you did. Only 20%, right? So would you suggest that there's not a problem with our system because 20% were successful, right? The fact that the overwhelming majority of people die the same place they started, right, suggests that something is fundamentally wrong. Now, the 20% that made it, they made it, right? Congratulations to them. I'm sure you had some great people come into your life to mentor you, to support you, whatever it may be, right? It happens to all, and that's part of how we make it. But the fact that only 20% of people did what you did says one or two things. Either the other 80% just don't have what you have. They don't have your work ethic. They don't have your discipline. They don't have, you know what I mean? Or something is wrong with the system that 80% of the United States is not able to do exactly what you did.
And that goes back to that topic we were talking about, systematic oppression, right?
He's hit it on the head. Hit the nail right on the head.
Larry, what'd you say?
Aren't those same statistics worldwide? Why does it only happen in this country? I don't believe that.
Statistics can be changed for whatever situation you're in, and I don't believe in statistics. But what I do believe in is what Dr. Brian has hit the nail on the head. Is it's not as much racism as it is social class. It's the people with money.
I didn't hear that
either. That's not what I'm saying at all. Right? I think because thing is, your race actually impacts your social class, right? If we look at no, I mean that's fine. But if you look at social, 80% are able to. 80% don't change their economic class. If you look at Black people, that number is higher.
Or what is the education level? What is the education level of Black people that are in those social positions?
So I would say this: if the average Black person who has a college degree makes about $350 less per week than their white counterpart with the same degree and same job, it's the same thing we see with women. Women who have the same work history, same work experience, same level of education, in the same job as a male, make less than that male. Like, anywhere. Like that is the national average, right?
That's not what the statistics are showing nowadays.
Yeah, but that's exactly what they're showing nowadays. That's why we have unequal pay between genders, right? It's a whole issue. There's a whole movement going on outside right now about unequal pay.
In what organization are you saying that they have different pay?
So, no, what I'm saying is if you look at the national average of men and women holding the same job with the same level of education and the same work history, women make less than men. They do.
In what profession?
In every profession on average.
That's not true. I can tell you as an auctioneer in the auctioneer profession, that's not the case.
You're talking about an auctioneer. I'm talking about nationally at jobs that you and I don't have.
It's like 80-20 rule.
It doesn't matter where you're at. What you're doing is you're clumping everything together. When you can't say it as a whole when you've got individuals that tell you that that's not the case.
No, and that's great.
In law enforcement, it's not the case in firefighting. It's not the case in auctioneering.
Well, I would say this.
County.
No, what I'm saying is it's an average. So with the average, in some places, it'll be equal pay. You're right.
It's a statistic that you were taught that's incorrect.
In some places, it will be equal. In some places, it will not be equal. Some places will be a $5 difference where men make more. In some places, women might even make more. In some places, it'll be equal. But when you put all those together and you look at the average, an average is a generalization by definition, right? In that average, and you might be 100% right. Auctioneers, that might be head-to-head, right? But in other areas, let's say in the tech industry or in academia where I work, right? Women generally get paid. So when you put all those numbers together, you have an average. And
I can tell you in the state of Florida, in academics in the state of Florida, the inequality is not there. And I know a lot of had that conversation that the inequality for pay in Florida is not there. So again, it comes down to you need to address these inequalities where it's occurring, not as a whole. As soon as you say, I agree with a lot of what you say, Dr. Bryant, but part of what my problem is that some of your statistics are outdated, and
all of my, let's be clear, all of my statistics are within the last 3 years, every one of them. So they're not mine, they're national studies done by the government, right? And you can look all of them up in your government website, criminal justice website, equal pay website, employment website, your whatever. Like, these are not mine. These are government produced projects, and they were all within the last 3 to 5 years.
Right, here's an example.
I just want to be clear about that. But yeah, please.
Okay.
Here's a good example. The George Floyd case. Okay. You've had 3 autopsies done. One autopsy said that he had drugs in his system. One autopsy said he did not. The third one said he did. Which one's lying? Somebody's lying.
Yes.
Right. So this is where the problem comes in, is that statistics can be manipulated for whatever situation. Now, if I was going to go into a situation where I was going to teach a group about Black history and I want to make Black history look bad so it benefits my agenda, I'm going to teach you what makes you follow that agenda. And that is what I think happens in a lot of cases. But I think it's motivated by the media, and it's motivated by the upper class who don't want to do the work. The upper class don't want to come down and do these lower end jobs. And that may be where my thinking comes in, where law enforcement has an equal pay and the systems that I know about have equal pay. Now, I can't talk about the tech industry because I don't know about the tech industry, but I do know about law enforcement in Florida. I do know about firefighting in Florida, the auctioneer system in Florida, the restaurant system in Florida. I can tell you that all these systems in Florida have equal pay now, where maybe 10 years ago they did not. But I can tell you that the statistics that are being shown today, if you go on and talk to even some of the more prevalent Black people in the community, Morgan Freeman, for example, Morgan Freeman got out there and said, there's no different. You can go out and do exactly what you want to do today.
I would say this. I would say this on Morgan Freeman. Nothing about him in particular, but I think that you are right. Has it gotten better? Yes, no doubt. It's gotten better for it's gotten better for women in this country, right? However, is it still bad? Yes. Is there still a lot of work to be done? Definitively, on both accounts. Right? Have we made progress? Yes. Have we even come close to arriving? Not even remotely close. And you're right. So the equal pay that you're seeing now is a product of people calling attention to it prior to.
But it contradicts what you said.
Exactly. So I think you continue to look at these issues and cause attention to them.
And I don't.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I totally respect you, Dr.
No, I don't
think any different.
No, I think that this whole conversation has been respectful amongst all of us. And I don't mean to cut anyone off because this is such great conversation, but we are approaching 2 hours and it doesn't feel like it.
All the time too.
What was that? Yeah, I don't want your wives to come mute me. So
I would like to get together and talk one-on-one with Dr.
Absolutely.
I might learn from you.
We'd absolutely love
to be very frank with all of you on the panel, I really appreciate you being on the panel, and for everyone who's viewed this, that's really what it's about. It's about having some of these conversations that might feel a little different and not as comfortable as we're used to having in private. You don't have to have them in this public forum. If you're comfortable having them in a public forum, please do so. We can have these conversations, have empathy, and have understanding and respect for each other. And sometimes, not saying your perception necessarily will change with these conversations, but you have a sense of empathy for each other and can understand. Tom, I understand maybe where you're coming from. Dr. Bryant, understand maybe where you're coming from. The same thing with you, Larry, and come to some type of medium and start getting some of the work done that's necessary. So I challenge every single last one of you all to go out and do what I'm calling the Moment of Truth Challenge. Everybody does these weird challenges on TikTok, and this is the new one, Moment of Truth. Have moments of truth with people that you usually don't have conversations with, that are usually not in your circle and don't share the same opinion. Challenge your views. This is how you grow. If you're interested in growing, you don't do the same thing. You want to lift weights to build muscle, you're going to increase the amount of weights you lift on a daily basis. Same thing here. You got to give yourself a challenge. Have those conversations around moments of truth in public and private sessions or conversations as much as you can. I do want to give my panelists an opportunity around a minute to close out with any closing thoughts. I really appreciate your time. And I want to start with you, Larry, to give any closing thoughts around some of the topics that we've discussed.
Well, I think we had some great conversation. Unfortunately, for the last half an hour or so, Tom's been muted on my phone. So I just got to hear Dr. Bryant's rebuttal, if you will. So I haven't really been part of the conversation, but the whole thing was great, and I hope that we can all talk again on whatever format, whether it's social media, whatever. Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you. Tom?
I just want to say, as a whole, we need to look at people and be cordial and inviting and accepting of all people. And my point of view, leave race out. When you talk about something, don't talk about the black man did this, don't talk about the white man did that. This man did this man did that, and see where it goes. See how you feel about the situation, and because sometimes if you are a black man and you've been wronged by somebody that's white, you may have a hard time with that white person. But if you can focus on the actions and the situation and remove the race part of it, that will start helping everyone to heal, and it will help you in your individual situations.
Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate you. Dr. Bryant?
Larry, Tom, enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to just kind of sit on that, and talk about some of these things. I would say this, I think for the audience, generally speaking, and even for, my fellow panelists, I would encourage people to, have conversations with people who don't agree with you, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not something that we normally do. Our social circles are usually people who are like-minded with a similar set of experiences or similar worldviews. And so I would say, have conversations with people who don't necessarily agree with you, who live in different spaces. And if you're having conversations with traditionally marginalized populations, whether it's, women, people from the LGBTQ plus communities, or people of color, and you're in a position of privilege, whether we recognize
Absolutely.
I would say when they tell you about their experiences, believe them. Believe them.
They're true. Absolutely.
Because one of the things that we always have to keep in mind is the people who are most negatively impacted usually have the clearest vision of what the problem is. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Bryant. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Tom. Please go out, share your moment of truth. That is the challenge. Have these conversations, and we'll talk to you soon. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, guys.
Good night.